Hello.
Good morning. It is wonderful to be here with you. It truly is. Welcome to Atlanta. For those of you who are not from here, I hope your travels were uneventful, unlike Mr. Jackson here, who literally just pulled up a few minutes ago. What we're going to do here today is we're the leadoff hitters. For those of you who follow baseball, you understand that. You could argue that Rickey Henderson was the greatest leadoff hitter in the Major League Baseball. And what we're about to do in the next 45 minutes is just like a Rickey Henderson or a Lou Brock. We're going to set the tone for the game or for this meeting. We're going to hit and run as best we can. Last but not least, we're going to create havoc for this day and a half. We're going to have lots of questions. We encourage you to please ask, stand up, and make sure you use a microphone that's set in the room so that everybody can hear your question. If not, I'll repeat it for you so that your question and your wisdom that you gain from it will be shared. Make sense? I am Raul Peralta. I'm a senior vice president with ECS. I live in North Carolina, and I'm delighted to be with you. I'd like to introduce my panelists, starting from my immediate right, Ms. Courtney Dunbar. Courtney Dunbar is a lead site selection consultant with Burns & McDonnell. She is a lead practice in the site selection consulting. She serves as a contributing writer and speaker for Area Development. Her articles are centered around site selection and site preparedness. Very smart young woman. Here's what you really need to know about Miss Courtney. Courtney is a split personality between Nebraska Cornhuskers and LSU Tigers. Just so happens that her daughter goes to LSU. Courtney is an avid marathon runner, 19 marathons in 17 states, and continues to do that. What I love about Courtney is that she loves dogs. Those of you who know me know that I do as well. She loves pugs in particular and has two, Marge and Mabel. Please join me in welcoming Courtney. Matt Jackson, Executive Managing Director with JLL, 27 years in location strategy and execution advisory. 40 countries across the world he has experience in. He has co-led 10 automotive assembly projects in the last 13 years. Some of those include VinFast in North Carolina and Scout in South Carolina. Born in New Zealand, I think it's the first person I've ever met from New Zealand, and is an avid soccer player. Please help me join Matt Jackson. Darin Buelow, father of two. This is a personal note. Father of two, and for the last 6 years has served as a volunteer on their middle school and high school robotics teams. That's right, robotics. He helped and execute their high school team's trips to Houston for both the 22 and 23 First Robotics World Championships, where they finished in the top 25 out of 640 teams competing. Darin is a principal with Deloitte Consulting, leader of their global location strategy, has over 20 years of experience, including leading major corporations in the deployment of talent, facilities, and equipment around the world. Please join me in welcoming Darin Buelow. Thane Hutcheson leads the site selection and location strategy practice for Baker Tilly's real estate advisory team. Again, he has various roles experienced throughout a project lifecycle of large public and private partnerships, including supply chain, labor market, site analysis, and also securing federal, state, and local discretionary tax credits and incentives. Here's a personal note. Thane is a huge fan of professional cycling. Please help me welcome Thane Hutcheson to the stage. Courtney, would you please start with your wisdom?
Sure. No question, just something to say.
Start with your presentation.
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, I don't really necessarily have a presentation for it. I will tell you that I was excited to hear the stat on the amount of contribution the southern United States makes not only to our economy, but the worldwide economy. I can tell you, as somebody who's dealing in a number of projects that are coming from Burns and McDonnell, where I'm at, the mass majority of the projects are looking at the South and then maybe somewhere else. Okay, so that's really, really good for all of you. And I think as far as pieces of wisdom that I'd like to bestow, you know, over the course of, I guess it's been 26 years of career, and you guys, that makes me feel old when I say that, but here we are. I would say that there have been dynamics and changes and shifts in the types of projects that have come into popularity over time, right? Remember the old wind blade manufacturing era? Biofuels manufacturing era. We're in a lot of different spaces right now where we're being pulled many directions. And I want you to remember that there are still an awful lot of projects out there that are sitting in that 100-acre, 150 million to 500 million CapEx sort of scenario, for which we're having a little bit of difficulty trying to accommodate, largely because it may not be the most popular topic at the moment. So I would encourage you to continue to really think about where you compete. Not necessarily what the industry is telling you is popular, it's where you can compete. And the better you guys can prep on that side, the better we can help you to land investment. So thanks for having me, and there's my intro.
Very good.
Okay, yeah, good morning, everyone. Matt Jackson here. Pleasure to be here. So I'm just going to touch on very quickly a couple of themes and trends that we're seeing in the market right now, and then hopefully at some point we get a chance for some Q&A. The first trend I should cover is the electrification of everything and how we're seeing that translate over to site selection needs in the US. I think in the last 36 months, we've seen just an absolute surge in demand for EV sites in the US, battery gigafactory sites in the US, and it's causing a real demand for mega sites, probably on a scale that we've never seen before in terms of the number of projects that are actively looking today. And also, the subscription of sites and really a war for companies trying to find the best site to meet their project needs. Obviously, when you're looking for sites with the intersection of the rail, the roads, the interchanges, the electricity, the gas, the water, the wastewater, the labor, permitting timelines, geotechnical conditions, it can become very complicated to find the right combination of attributes that really result in a site being feasible for the project. And what we've been finding as we have inventoried sites, on the last two projects we actually inventoried more than 70 mega sites across pretty much the central region of the US across to the east. And we're finding that there is just an unbelievable demand for properties that have the capability of supporting these projects. And we're hopeful that states, communities will continue to invest in the infrastructure and programs to deliver more really good quality sites to the market, because I think where all the A sites are gone, we're probably down to the B pluses, soon probably be at the Bs or B minuses. And I say that as a characterization in that we need a lot of additional investment to make the sites that remain, I think, feasible for these big projects. Typically, you're running into a lot of challenges you have to resolve and you have to negotiate to make something feasible. So that was probably one of the first trends. Actually, I'll cover that in terms of electrification of everything leading into the demand and availability for mega sites. The next trend we're seeing, I think, is tied to the Biden administration policies. I think everyone's very familiar with the IRA, the CHIPS Act, but there's another policy we've seen that's actually having quite a significant impact on companies' decisions on where to locate their operations, and that's Section 301 of the tariffs and duty regulation. Essentially, what's happening in the background is the Biden administration has levied an additional 25% duty on products coming in from China, and it's levied on over 6,000 HS codes. To put some perspective on what that's meant on a couple of projects, when we were doing a project for a medical device company before this program was implemented, it was really, really difficult for them to move their supply base out of China and shift their manufacturing out of China to we'll just call it elsewhere. We did a project that looked at Southeast Asia versus the US and other places. Now with that additional 25% duty that's being levied on all the imports, and I should also mention that China's levied a retaliatory 10% on products going into China. China moved from being one of the lowest cost geographies to one of the highest cost geographies now that as we look at the landscape of Southeast Asia, Europe, US and China. So it's having quite a significant effect, and we're hearing from many clients that they're trying to figure out what to do in light of these new tariffs without knowing exactly how long, I should say duties, without knowing how long this may continue into effect. And I think it's causing a lot of organizations to rethink China versus Southeast Asia versus North America, including Mexico. So that's another, I think, pertinent development that probably will have a lot of impact in projects taking another look at the US and obviously specifically the Southeast. The next item I'll just address quickly is supply chain resilience. I think COVID really highlighted the difficulties of having a supply base that was largely outside of the US, and companies are struggling to figure out exactly what they do with the shift of that supply base. Do they bring it back into North America? Do they have a supply base where the supply in China is for China? Do they shift some of the capabilities out of China to Southeast Asia or into Mexico and other places? And we're seeing a lot of discussion from companies trying to figure out, well, what should they actually support in the US, knowing that we could face other barriers, trade barriers, border closures and other things that limit their ability to move raw materials into their products. And we have heard things such as building additional manufacturing capacity in the US, where you maybe have one shift that's active, two shifts remain idle until the time they need to surge, and scale the second and third shift to bring manufacturing capability back to the US. We've also seen a lot of companies talk about actually shifting, diversifying their supplier base, bringing a lot of the suppliers, or at least some of the suppliers, back to the US, which again has an impact on demand for sites in the US as that supply base shifts. So it's another theme we're seeing that we continue to expect to see as we go forward into the next 2-3 years at a minimum. The last topic I thought I'd just touch on real quick is labor. I guess you can't have a location or site selection discussion without talking about labor. We've just completed 4 mega projects in the US, actually not all in the US, but globally, 3 in the US or North America, all requiring at least 5,000 employees. And what we're generally finding for projects of that scale is we're running into real challenges and we could reduce it down to 2 categories. One is the labor available? And the second is, if it is available, do you have the right composition of talent for your organization? And it's becoming increasingly difficult, particularly because as we think about mega site locations, they tend to be outside of a metro area, maybe 45, 60, maybe even a further distance from a major metropolitan area. So it's really difficult to find the intersection point of a site that's close enough to a labor force of the size, scale, and capability to support and sustain the operation into the future. So creative ideas on how to grow the labor force, implementing programs to relocate the labor force, looking at other considerations that a company can also do to help them become a really attractive employer in light of the competitions in the market is something else that we're seeing quite often discussed within the C-suite in these companies. So I'll pause there and I'll hand it across to Darin.
Pause. You want to continue, Matt? I mean, that was awesome, right? Can I just say ditto to Matt, Raul? Is that an acceptable? No, great stuff, Matt and Courtney. So when we thought about this panel, we wanted to talk a little bit about trends. What's different? What are we seeing now that maybe is a little bit of an evolution over what we've seen over the last 12 to 24 months? And I'm going to echo some of the same trends that Courtney and Matt talked about, but that just means I would add emphasis to those trends. So From our perspective at Deloitte, we would say those trends are the advent of the mega project, which is expected to continue. That in turn leading to a shortage of sites, both at the mega scale and in the moderate scale. I would say, Matt, that the sites have been picked over. We're looking at C sites and D sites. Not even the A's and B's are around anymore. Third, that shortage of talent is real, and I'll talk a little bit more about that because I think it manifests itself not just in the touch labor, but also in construction labor. Fourth is the challenges that we have in terms of utilities trying to serve these projects, and how, as you all in the audience know, so many of these projects wanting 100% renewable energy off the grid, which is patently unfair, but that's what they want. This is a trend that is really taking off. And then fifth, China. I think we really should have a conversation about China, what we're seeing from China, and how the states themselves have very different and evolving postures when it comes to China that we're, I think, paying very close attention to. So maybe a sixth trend would be new sort of what's next industries that we're expecting to kind of come out of the hopper. We've all seen semiconductors. We're all experiencing batteries and EV and that supply chain. We should be seeing a lot of hydrogen projects, electrolyzers, hydrolyzers, fuel cells. All of that is coming and is in play right now. There aren't, quite frankly, that many companies in that sector. All of them have tons and tons of backlog in sales, and they don't have enough manufacturing to keep up. That's what we expect to be busy on in 2023 and 2024. All right, back to the top, and I'm not going to drill deep on any of these, but just a few words. Advent of the mega projects. If it's conference season, right? We've been to the Guild, we did Bradley Arendt Forum, Select USA, now at SEDC. We all know the mega projects have really multiplied. If we define those mega projects as 1 billion in CapEx and 1,000 jobs or more, the flow of mega deals is about 10x what it was pre-COVID across multiple industry sectors, but especially exacerbated by CHIPS and IRA. Those projects are very different and special and are stressing everything about our industry. They're stressing the site availability, the utility loads, the time that we have to do these projects. The labor loads are unreal. We've got a project right now that is 130 million gallons a day of water demand. We've had projects that are in excess of 800 megawatt electrical demand. We're aware of others that have over a gig of electrical demand. And none of our sites are prepared for anything like this. None of the engineering about site improvements have contemplated scale to this level, and that's a real stress and strain on the system. In terms of electrification and renewable energy, I know Thane's going to talk a little bit more about that. I would just tell you that we're not seeing any let up in the demand for renewable energy. Some clients, something to pay attention to, have different definitions of what renewable energy is. Some will, of course, count wind and solar and may or may not count nuclear. They may or may not count hydro as renewable. So just be aware of that. Some will also not accept RECs or PPAs. They want it from the grid. And you might throw up your hands and say, well, that's impossible. It's not impossible. There are locations in the United States that have 100% renewable energy on the grid. And certainly there are locations in Canada that have it. That's your competition. So as we move to shift more from a carbon-based electrical grid to a renewable-based electrical grid, don't think that the competitors out there can't offer a better value proposition. But if you can dig deep into what the client really needs, maybe they can accept PPAs and RECs. Labor shortages. Matt talked a little bit about touch labor. We're starting to spend a lot of time evaluating construction labor markets. The contractors out there are all but terrified about the shortage of skilled tradesmen, and particularly electricians. Our nation's average electrician age is around 56. We don't have enough young electricians going into the trade. And when we evaluate different markets for large projects, we have to think about whether or not the construction industry in that market can even handle a project of this size, or will we have to pay traveler wage? What kind of scale are we going to have to experience, maybe even under a PLA, a project labor agreement. That's becoming part of the site selection analysis. Shortage of sites, yes, large and small. We're not creating enough ready-to-go sites faster than the projects are taking them up. And this is a challenge everyone in this room has. It's a challenge that we have as the location consultants when the portfolio of sites that we're all looking at is not necessarily up to snuff. The great sites have factories on them. That's what we tell our clients. And so we're trying to prepare the clients for the reality that every site that they look at is going to have some problem with it, and that's just life. You've got to get over that and pick the least flawed location as the winner across all factors. China, as we look at how different states change their posture to serving China, understand that there are different flavors of projects coming from China. There can be U.S. headquartered or European headquartered or other country headquartered companies that have Chinese investors. Those investors might be private individuals or they might be state-owned enterprises. There can be companies headquartered in China that are all private money or could have some component of state-owned money. The states themselves seem to have evolving viewpoints about whether or not they'll support these projects given the deteriorating relationships that we seem to have with China. Right or wrong? But make no mistake, as Matt indicated, there are a lot of good reasons why we should expect to continue to see a flow of projects coming from China that are interested in investing in the United States. It's up to every state what they want to do with that. Nobody's forcing anybody to do anything. But be aware that there are states out there that welcome investments from China that might say, well, we'd rather have these jobs in the United States than in the Philippines or in Indonesia. We'd rather have the property tax revenue in the United States than somewhere else. So just be aware. I think that's a deal flow that's not probably going to stop unless there's a shooting war that happens. And we all have to kind of think about how would we react if we get an RFI from a project that's either based in China or has money from China, part of the capital stack is from China. Will we treat SOEs different from private money? And then finally, the different industries that are coming. We would expect more investment from chips and semiconductor suppliers. We would expect more investment from battery suppliers, certainly more battery OEMs, because even though we've announced 25, 35, 45 EV battery plants in the United States, that's just not going to be enough. And there's going to be more and more of a demand for this product. The suppliers need to follow. But then behind those will be wind and solar and hydrogen, all incented by the IRA and all with massive business reasons to build manufacturing in the United States. Thanks so much, and let me turn it over to Thane.
Thank you. Hard to follow. It's an honor to be up here with this panel. Similar, I'll just say ditto, Darin. My key trends points that I wanted to make this morning echo everything that's already been said, so I won't dwell on that. But just my four primary points here: power, and foreign direct investment. So each of those powers has a different focus, but it is all power related. So the primary driver of any manufacturing location decision, which are the primary clients that I'm working with, is availability of power. Before we even get into anything around site characteristics, incentives, tax structure, it's can you actually do the project there? Because of the constraints around utilities, primarily power. The trend we're seeing, and I'm sure others have on the panel and in the room, larger projects, so higher capital investment with automation, lower job creation because of automation. So it's driving additional utility use. So kind of the project metrics have shifted: higher capex, lower jobs. My next power are the types of projects. So EV, solar, semiconductor. Those are the projects that have to move today. There isn't a waiting around for it. There isn't we need to think about this. It's either go or we're going to be left behind. So those are really the three primary types of projects. EV and solar obviously directly related to power, but semiconductor being a massive power utility user, driving projects and driving utilities. Third power is IRA and CHIPS Act. So the Inflation Reduction Act is very much changing the landscape and the timelines of these projects. So similar, even manufacturing projects that can take advantage of components of the Inflation Reduction Act. It's encouraging and incentivizing projects to occur faster, potentially larger. It's pretty monumental, the impacts that it's having on projects. Fourth is foreign direct investment. So a lot of these foreign companies see the tax credits, whether it's Inflation Reduction Act or CHIPS Act, and they have to move. They see the U.S. As the primary market, both to sell their products and to manufacture, and the tax credits are incentivizing them to do that. And then finally, to echo Darin's point, the how do we work with China? How do we wade through that? It's a challenge. Each community, each state has seemingly a different approach on how to treat Chinese companies. Each Chinese company, that's even an overly broad term, as Darin went into on is it Chinese investor owned, or is it state-owned entity? And there is no company that is like another. So the foreign direct investment from China in particular has been a challenge on how to work with communities and states in that process.
Thank you all. I've got a couple of different questions that I'd like to share with you and just have you think about them. And we got together before we got together this morning and talked about a couple of different topics. And I'm very curious, Courtney, you started off with making the point that a trend is we tend to forget the smaller sites as opposed to the big, sexy mega sites that we're all seeing in front of us. I didn't hear any conversation on rail and rail served. And I know that there's several of us here that are in that space. I'm curious as to if you can expand on that, midsize and rail.
Well, thanks for asking. This is my favorite topic. I love rail serve sites. So throughout my career and early in my career, I spent a lot of time with really excellent rail engineers. And I remember at one point having a discussion about site prep with a group of them. And one looks at me and he goes, well, Courtney, you're all about location, location, location. We're all about operations, 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 right? And those of you that have dealt with rail know where I'm going. You cannot do diligence on the cheap, folks. I've run into a couple of instances here in the last couple of years, one of which was a developer that had a site that was approximately 300 acres. And the assumption was because upline, literally across the highway, there was an ability to spur from that particular line into the site years ago, that they could just go ahead and look at the geometrics, master plan the site to the south, and you would be able to, in effect, serve it with rail. We knew, due to classifications, when we sat down in the meeting with them, that there would be no way that we could do it, and it would have ended up costing our client between 10 and 15 million additional dollars to achieve that service in the site. I think far too often what may be happening right now as it pertains to rail serve sites is either one, it's just assumed that it runs by, it probably can serve, which is not the case. Number two, we need to be in a position where the folks that are actually designing for that are thinking about geometrics and operations, both. Okay, you always start with the rail when you think about site development, site prep. And number three, there is a little bit of a concern, and I hope I don't ruffle feathers saying this, but we have browbeat into you for years this idea that you need to have shovel-ready or potentially certified sites. You know what I really want from you? I want information, okay, and I want it correct. Because as Darin said, not all sites, actually, there will not be a perfect situation for any site. But if your information is there and it is correct, and we know how we can manipulate that particular site with our engineering teams to be able to place a pad, then we are in a very good position. But if the information is inaccurate and lacking, that's where we run into major problems. And when we browbeat the idea that it had to be shovel ready, then all of a sudden we started seeing a lot of developers come into the market as an idea that that would cure. And then we're running into problems there because developers in turn are not necessarily putting up manufacturing spec, right? They're putting up a lot of warehousing and logistics. So if we bring projects, there could be a mass acceleration of the cost of that ground without a whole lot of improvements just for the purpose of being able to have somebody to get you to shovel ready. So in general, rail is very important, has to be handled by people who understand rail and how it will work with the company's needs.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So we're being really active in the automotive space, and I would say that all the automotive companies want rail-served sites. What we generally find is once we find the right representative with one of the rail providers, it's possible to work on solutions with the design, figure out timelines for any kind of extensions, acquisition of right-of-ways, where shunting yards, siding yards go, and other things. So very strong preference for rail-served sites. If the service doesn't exist today, we spend a lot of time working with the different service providers to figure out how that solution would be delivered with a keen interest in understanding the timeline associated with that. Typically, 24, 36, 48 months, but key consideration for the big projects, for sure.
Anyone else on that? Let's talk about the trend of going from manual to automated processes. And I know that that's something that we're all seeing. And if I can get one of you to start with your thoughts on that, that'd be great.
Well, I think, Raul, it's about trading man hours for kilowatt hours, and what that's doing to America's factory floor is it's turning everything into an advanced manufacturer. If it was a high labor content and a lot of manual processing, that plant is probably in Mexico or in Asia. So not always, right? There are still some mission critical or food grade or other sensitive products that have to be made here and are still made here with unskilled labor and probably will be that way forever and ever. But a lot of companies have shifted to automation and traded out as much labor as they can, and that places more pressure on our educational institutions to prepare graduates to take those jobs with 2-year tech degrees, 4-year degrees, factory of the future, white lab coat environments, and I think probably all 4 of us, the kinds of projects that we're citing in the United States are all on that advanced side of the coin, and all require significant upskilling. So I see that the demand for STEM skills, the demand for 2-year tech college grads is going to do nothing except increase. States that are well set up to offer that kind of training and that kind of tuition assistance, like what they do in Tennessee, is those states are at an advantage, quite honestly. They've got a bigger pipeline of people that are well equipped to take those jobs on the new factory floor.
There was an instance recently where I had a community that was talking to me about where the site selection project that we had brought to them potentially was competing in other states. And what I really wanted to say was, you may be competing against 3 other states, but guess who else you're competing against? The company itself, right? Because at the same time, I work for a company that designs process for manufacturers. At the same time, we may be looking at a new build. We're often looking at what it looks like to lean out, to automate portions of that process to make it such that they're optimized across their entire flow of their system. Here's the kicker, folks. Most of your states will penalize my companies if they are trying to hold on to staying in your location with an existing plant, and they need to cut bodies in order to maintain process. right? So if we go in there and we make massive capital investment in equipment and machinery and process flow and potentially additions to buildings, and yet we reduce headcount, they can be penalized. So I think as far as a trend to the future, there has to be some look at the way in which your tax policy and the way in which you award them from an incentive base is different, because it isn't always going to be continuum, and it's very important as far as the retention and growth in your community.
Yeah, if I may supplement too. So we actually took a look at the labor force figures dating back to 1970, and manufacturing jobs in the US have declined by 50% since 1970 through to today. Yet the GDP in the operations, manufacturing operations, has gone up by a multiple of 3. So it follows on from Darin's comment that a lot of the manual, lower skilled assembly type operations have been leaving, and they're getting replaced with more operations that are automated, more process-based. Tying that back to one of the opening comments I made around the availability of labor and the composition, that's the challenge we're seeing, is that we can't find enough of the workforce that are classified as skilled or having that 2-year degree, or that we can transfer and train quickly into more automated, more advanced manufacturing-like positions. That's where we're rallying to the challenges, and we're turning to the states, looking at, and the community colleges and the counties, et cetera, looking at how we can grow that workforce quickly to ensure that we have a sustainable supply of talent that can be re-entering or entering the workforce on an ongoing basis. So I don't think this trend's going to go away at all. I think it's going to get amplified, and I think the stresses on the labor force are going to get even worse.
Final thought, not long, on this topic. A lot of the industries or companies that I'm working with, particularly solar, so they're primarily made in Vietnam, Cambodia, China. They're building these new facilities in the U.S., and it's an entirely different process. So building out a process, so that's where bringing on process engineers like Burns and McDonnell is really important, because they have experience manufacturing these products in low-cost markets, low-wage markets, and then they're having to redesign an entirely new facility and new process because they want or need to be in the U.S., tax credits and whatnot. And so it's a totally different factory. It's a totally different process, facility, and that's a real challenge where we're having to do a lot of hand-holding, making introductions to folks that do this type of work, because they don't have those capabilities in-house.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about infrastructure demands. And I think all of you mentioned certainly power as being an upcoming demand on those providers. Can we talk a little bit about water and also roads and access to these mega sites as they're being put together?
Yeah, I'll start. So I think you all in the audience are hearing a kind of a common refrain from us, and I'm afraid you're in for a full day or two of common refrain from consultants that are going to talk about shortages of labor, shortages of sites, and shortages of electric capability. I mean, if you're sitting on a large tract of developable land that has access to tons of talent and tons of power, if you're at the intersection of that Venn diagram, you've got something, because we can't find very many places like that right now. More broadly speaking to the rest of the infrastructure equation, yes, for certain projects, all of those other ingredients are needed. Significant water loads mean significant wastewater loads. Oftentimes, gas is a process utility that many companies need and are going to need it at your site as well. Some of these companies are going to need rail. Most of them are going to need heavy road access and infrastructure. So you're used to those kinds of conversations with folks like us. I think the trend that we're seeing, if this is a panel about trends, is that those other demands are just increasing and getting more and more intense. For a project that we led last year that announced in October, the wastewater demand, the wastewater demand of the company was so intensive that the state and the locals had to figure out a new treatment package that would cost $1 billion to serve one project. And that was the table stakes. That was what the states and the communities were willing to do to get that mega project. Just an example, even on the smaller scale, food projects, significant water and wastewater load, paper projects, steel projects, they're always going to have a gas, they're always going to have a rail need, a road need, and all of these other infrastructure and utilities. So as you kind of prepare for the next RFI, prepare for the next project, and making sure you've got good answers for all of these infrastructure questions, that's the only way you can be prepared.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about tidbits of what I think you can do when you go home to do that, okay? Because we're laying a lot on you and it's probably slightly overwhelming, right? The easiest way for you to prepare to be able to up those capacities is to not only do those diligence pieces you need on those sites, you need to master plan the properties, okay? Because if you do that, we understand better what the logical routing, our easements, our access, our drainage, all of those things in a cost continuum can be. And then capital improvements budgeting can be set up so that you can start having the discussions to move dollars and priority and planning and permitting toward offsetting what we know potentially could come your direction, right? You cannot make an ask to build masses of infrastructure to something for which there's no plan. And we know it won't develop exactly as we have laid it out in a master plan, but at least it gives an idea as to generalized order of magnitude costing, which allows you to start chipping away at that. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I'll supplement with a comment. So in general, very, very concerned about water. We're fortunate in that we're in a region of the country that is not yet or doesn't have the challenges you'll see in, say, the southwest of the US or the west, or in Mexico or many other countries around the world. But we're seeing it become a real significant challenge for a lot of communities. The competing uses between agriculture, between human consumption, between industrial consumption, the lack of availability in some areas, the declining groundwater levels, the declining surface water levels, other things, are a pretty significant concern. Again, not so much in this region, so we're a little bit lucky there, but really something to keep your eye on, I think, and focus on a longer-term plan where there can be a sustainable supply delivered to the communities, to the industrial sites and other things. Building on one of Darin's comments, a lot of the projects we worked on recently will need at least 1 million gallons a day in water. Haven't come across a 5 million yet, but yeah, pretty significant. And so there's always a lot of attention paid to the water solution, the source, the sustainability, the quality. Most companies we work with are very acutely aware of the challenges around the world, so their engineering teams spend a lot of time focused on the ability to maintain the water and make sure they're not competing with other uses that where the demand becomes a real political challenge.
You know, if you thought our jobs were going to get easier, we just heard that power is going to be on more demand, water is going to be in higher demand, and guess what? There's going to be added pressure on the labor market to make sure that you can address the automation of these plants. So how about that? Courtney, you talked to me the other day about a topic, a concept that I had never heard, and I'd like for you to share your thoughts with the crowd, and that's the concept of understanding a site, not just certifying it. Do you remember talking about that?
Yep.
Okay, would you share your thoughts?
There's a few people that know me out here. I know who you are. I heard those laughs. Here's the deal. Certification programs are great if they allow you to move toward diligence completion, all right? And I want you to be able to do that. I think that's a really good thing. I think where my concern is sometimes that it stops short of that master plan scenario, which I think is so, so, so important that I just shared information on. But here's where the kicker comes in, right? I mean, we've talked a lot about mega projects, and they're going to end up having massive loads and capacity. You're going to end up needing to have robust availability of infrastructure across the board, clean natural environment conditions, et cetera. But what happens when I bring you a user that doesn't use natural gas or let's say you don't have it, but I bring you a user that doesn't have it. Does that make your site valid or invalid? Well, it's valid, right? But it wouldn't necessarily receive a stamp. So where I'm going is not every user is necessarily going to be completely drawn to all pieces of infrastructure and availability. Therefore, it is most important that you have information, right? It is not most important necessarily that it is completely to a baseline minimum for me. And when we're working with projects, and again, I'm a little bit different in my space because I'm dealing with a portfolio clientele at Burns & McDonnell. We have engineers internally that are able to take a look at that information, determine what is truly deficient and matters and what may not in that scene. But I think too many sites are getting bucked from consideration because somehow they haven't been able to achieve a stamp. And if they're effectively targeted, the information may allow them to get over that hurdle and host users. So don't just stop at the idea that you're not perfect, so therefore we should just vacate.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that concept?
Even if it's a certified site, we're still going to help with due diligence. We're still going to go through the process. We're still going to validate information. And so for us, it doesn't really mean a whole lot, but having the information readily available, so to Courtney's point, if it helps you get that information, more power to you, but we're still going to have to validate everything.
Yeah, I think most location site selection consultants would like a certified site and like knowing there's one out there that might meet your requirements. But where I generally see the site certification process fall down, again, for the big projects, and I apologize because that's what we've been working on mostly recently, is when the project exceeds what is certified and or runs into jurisdictional wetlands water features that then have to go through the federal permitting process. Most projects we've been working on, or I think it's been discussed up here, just have these crazy timelines now where everyone has to be operational within 9 months or 12 months or something completely unreasonable. And as soon as you get kicked into the permitting process where you have to go through the Army Corps of Engineers, to go through the wetlands mitigation, figuring out if can you work on the uplands while the wetlands are being reviewed and other things, you run into timeline challenges. And that's where I think one of the primary challenges reside with any site, is trying to figure out what the pre-construction timelines look like. And then the other consideration we're seeing on the bigger project, geotechnical conditions and what the load-bearing capacity is on the sites. I don't think most certified sites really spend too much time thinking about what the actual needs of the footprint of some of these large installations are. And so even if a site's certified, we still may run into challenges in that we just can't support the loads we need. So certified sites are great, but I think the key is just making sure the community and all the subject matter experts that are assembled around that site are able to address any potential challenge that may come up as you start to intersect all the things we're talking about.
Any questions from the room? There are 2 microphones set. Any questions?
Yeah, there's somebody, but we can't see you all very well.
We can't see you. Can you?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
My name is Frederick. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. So some of the utility companies, both in my state and others, they're like the actual infrastructure materials to expand their transmission capacity is significantly delayed. They're telling me 12, 18, 24 months. So power, they want to serve it, but then they can't get the supplies to expand their capacity. Are you all seeing that too?
Yeah, Frederick. So for those of you that couldn't hear, Frederick from Montana, I think Montana, right? I think we met at Select USA. So Frederick from Montana, it was suggesting that what he's hearing from power companies in his state is that the material backlog for, I'm guessing, substation infrastructure, transformers is 12 months, 15 months, 18 months, 2 years. And is that what the consultants are seeing? Yes, I think that's a common issue, I think, everywhere. And with, foreign direct investment, some of these companies are operating at, let's call it, unusual voltages. And so those transformers aren't necessarily sitting on the shelf. Even if they were, they're probably spoken for, and the development timelines for all of these projects are getting pushed out. 2-year schedules, 3-year construction timelines, enabling power some time to catch up. but that's not necessarily a disadvantage, Frederick, for you.
Good question. Any other questions? To the future panelists, we have set the tone. That's up to you to carry it. Second, these are very comfortable chairs. I don't want to leave.
Maybe for people who are tall and don't have a dress on. Yes, thank you.
Help me thank the smart panelists that share their knowledge with us. We now have a 15-minute break in the lobby. Our next panel on product development begins at 10:15. Thank you all.